Hello, welcome. Dr. Sushma Singh this side. Today in Unit 19, Verrier, Elwin and G.S. Guryev's perspective on tribe, let us continue our topic Constituent Assembly debates and tribal peoples. And subtopic is persons not to be deprived of property save by authority of law. No person shall be deprived of his property save by law. In the draft constitution, this was Article 24. In the discussion around this article, the justification and implication of this article were spelled out. Shri Jawaharlal Nehru, if property is required for public use, it is a well-established law that it should be acquired by state by compulsion if necessary, and compensation is paid, and the law had laid down methods of judging their compensation. But more and more today the community has to deal with large schemes of social reforms, social engineering, etc., which can hardly be considered from the point of view that the individual acquisition of a small bit of land or structure. Difficulties arise apart from every other difficulty, the question of time. Here is a piece of legislation that the community, as presented in its chosen representatives, considers quite essential for the progress and safety of the state. And it is a piece of legislation which affects millions of people. Obviously, you cannot leave that the piece of legislation to long, widespread and continuous litigation in the courts of law. Otherwise, the future of millions may be affected. Otherwise, the whole structure of the state may be shaken to its foundations. We are passing through a tremendous age of transition. How are you going to protect the individual? I begin by saying that there are two approaches, the approach of the individual and the approach of the community. But how are we to protect the individual today except the few who are strong enough to protect themselves? They have become fewer and fewer. In such a state of affairs, the state has to protect the individual right to property. He may possess his property, but it may mean nothing to him because some monopoly comes in the way and prevents him from the enjoyment of his property. The subject therefore is not a simple one because the individual may lose that right completely by the functioning of various forces both in the capitalist direction and in the socialist direction. Shri Damodar Sarup said, it is not clear whether the words acquisition of the property for the public purpose includes socialization of land and industries or compulsory transfer of property from one set of persons to the other. It may well be argued that these words mean acquisition of property only for the general use of government, local self-governing bodies and other charitable and public institutions, and cannot be allowed to be stretched to nationalization or socialization. The subject therefore needs clarification, and that clarification, in my humble opinion, is not possible unless we discard the idea, or I should say the theory, that man has natural right in property, and also the idea that the property is a projection of personality, and any invasion on property is an interference with the personality itself. Man has no natural right in property. Claim to property is acquired by law recognized by community. The community has always reserved to itself the right to modify laws with respect to property and acquire it from its owners in common social and economic interest of people. Property is a social institution, and like all other social institutions, it is subjected to regulations and claim of common interest. The property of the entire people, it must be understood, is mainstay of the state in the development of national economy, and the right to private property cannot be allowed to stand in the way or be used to detriment of the community. The state must have the full right to regulate, limit and expropriate property by means of law in the common interest of the people. The doctrine of compensation as a condition for expropriate cannot be accepted as a gospel truth. Death duty is a form of partial expropriation without compensation, and it forms an essential feature of a financial system of many a progressive country in the world. It is almost universally recognized that full compensation to the owners of the property will make impossible any large project of social and economic agglomeration to be materialized. It is impossible for the state to pay owners of property in all classes and at market value for the property requisitioned or acquired in times of emergency or for the purpose of socialization of big industries, with a view to eliminate exploitation and promoting general economic welfare. Partial compensation is therefore suggested as a via media which will neither hinder socialization nor at the same time will it deprive a large number of persons of means of livelihood. Professor T.K. Shah: acquisition of land for public purpose, acquisition of any form of property, movable or immovable, or for any public purpose, including the working of their enterprise for the benefit of the public, is, I think, an inherent right of the sovereign community which should not be subject to any exception. I have therefore suggested that any such property to be acquired can be acquired for public purpose without defining what is exactly meant by public purpose, subject to such compensation if any. Not all property is deserving of compensation, nor should be Constitution recognize categorically without qualification or modification the right to compensation as appears to be the case. The Congress did not question the way tribal were being talked about as backward and primitive, neither was any question asked as to whether regulative state control was absolutely necessary and whether excluded areas was the way to do so. The debate got involved with justifying or criticizing exclusion, having lost sight of the fact exclusion was a consequence of protest against British rule. Exclusion was an expression of a social and cultural attitude toward the people who lived in a forest. Those who argued for assimilation either upheld the norms of mainstream development under colonial regime, and they were unaware of the forest dwellers' contribution to the struggle for freedom and independence. Today there are three positions left, center and the right. All agreed that as forest dwellers, a people living in a state of nature, tribal people had no future. The difference between them was the regards to the process of becoming a part of the mainstream and their place and position in it. Correspondingly, their definitions of the key terms differ. Here we want to close this lecture. Thanks for listening.